Little Fergus's Big Adventure by Laura Hepburn. This is a story about how even the smallest of things can make a big difference. And Fergus the iron colloid was a very small thing. He was pretty much as small a thing as a thing could be. In fact, you could line up about 200 Ferguses alongside one another on the head of a pin. But Fergus was a very unhappy iron colloid. He didn't like feeling small, and there was something else too. For as long as he could remember, Fergus had had a nagging feeling in the back of his mind that there was something he really should be doing. The problem was, he just could not work out what it was. One day, Fergus climbed up to the top of the moss that grew in spongy clumps on top of the damp, dark peat in which he lived. If only I knew exactly what it was that I had to do, he wished. As his thoughts continued to daydream, Fergus began to notice an unusual grumbling noise, like the beginning of a thunderstorm. He looked up to the sky, expecting to see rain or lightning to accompany the thunder, but he was shocked to see a beautiful blue sky overhead. He felt the ground beneath his feet begin to tremble, and with it the low grumbling noise quickly became louder and louder, and then, with an almighty crunch of metal on metal, Fergus was scooped up and catapulted into the air by the strong jaws of a huge and monstrous beast. Fergus didn't have time to think. He knew he only had seconds before he would be gobbled up. So, mustering up all of his courage, he scrambled to the very edge of a huge tooth and hurled himself out of the monster's giant, crushing mouth. And, with a splash, he landed in the cold, crisp water of the burn that trickled its way through his peatland home. Glad to have escaped from the terrifying monster, Fergus began to relax in the waters of the trickling burn that calmly floated him along as it began its long and winding journey out towards the sea. Pretty soon, the small trickling burn turned into a broad, meandering river that twisted and turned its way along the floor of the valley, and the further Fergus travelled along the river, the more he started to feel quite strange. He noticed a sharp tingling sensation on his tongue as the water started to get saltier, and then he felt really quite queasy. His stomach started to wobble and make some very unhappy noises. And then Fergus realised that the further he travelled towards the sea, the more he was starting to fall apart. He started to lose whole chunks of his body. "Oh no," he thought, "what am I going to do? If I can't think of something quickly, I'm going to disappear completely. And I can't do that because I know that I still have a really important job to do. If only I could remember what it was." But there was no time for Fergus to think about his really important job at the moment, because he had now left the river and was travelling onwards towards the sea in an estuary. Every second that the estuary carried him closer and closer to the sea, the smaller and smaller he shrank. And then, through the murky brown water, Fergus noticed a tiny black speck ahead of him in the gloom. For some reason that he could not quite explain, Fergus was drawn to this speck. He felt that if only he could catch up to it in time, then everything would be okay. So, even though his long journey through the burn, and then the river, and now the estuary, had left him tired and very, very scared, he gathered up his last bit of strength and paddled as fast as he could towards the little black speck in the distance. His little legs had never moved so fast as they propelled him through the rushing water, and just when he thought his arms were about to fall off from sheer exhaustion, he saw that the black speck was now just in front of him. He could almost touch it. Then, as a sudden surge of water pushed him forwards, he grabbed hold of the speck as he went tumbling past, and squeezed it close as tightly as his weary little arms could manage. As he did so, the little black speck let out a yelp of surprise. "Oi! Who is that? What's going on?" it said. Fergus turned the speck around and was amazed to see that it wasn't just a small black speck after all. "I'm Callum, and I'm a carbon atom. Are you okay? You don't look very well at all." "I'm terribly sorry to have crashed into you," said Fergus. "I was really scared when the river turned into an estuary, and I just didn't know what to do. I swam to catch up with you because I thought you might be able to help to stop me from falling apart." "Well," asked Callum, "did it work? Do you feel any better?" "Actually," thought Fergus, "yes, I do." "Well then," said Callum, "if it's going to stop you from falling apart, I think it's best that we travel on together." Fergus agreed that this sounded like a terrific idea. "So," asked Callum, "where exactly are we going?" Fergus thought about this a minute, and he pondered the question, and he mulled it over, and then, eventually, with a sigh, he replied, "Oh, it's no good, Callum. I know that I'm on my way to do something really important, but I just don't know what it is." "Oh, don't worry," comforted Callum. "There are two of us now. Surely together we can work out what it is that you need to do." And so began the journey of Fergus the iron colloid and Callum the carbon atom into the open ocean. Carried along in the strong ocean currents, the two brave little particles passed other estuaries where rivers merged into the ocean, and here they saw lots of other iron colloids just like Fergus, and each one was travelling with a carbon atom, just like Callum. But their journey didn't stop there. It carried them into the chilliest parts of the ocean, where the sea ice melted and drip, drip, dripped iron colloids into the sea. They passed hot, sweltering deserts where the warm, sandy winds blew other iron colloids from the land straight into the sea. And they travelled way down into the darkness of the deepest ocean depths, where they found even more iron colloids bubbling up from hydrothermal vents that looked like smoking underwater volcanoes. "Surely one of these iron colloids must know what you're supposed to be doing," suggested Callum. So Fergus asked each one in turn, but none of the other iron colloids that they met could help. "No," they all replied, "we have no idea what our job is, but we do know that it is very, very important." Just then, a strong current whizzed past Fergus, Callum, and all of the other iron colloids and carbon atoms, and carried them to the surface of the ocean. When they arrived, they could not believe what they saw. Floating in the water in front of them were millions upon millions of tiny sea plants made up of all shapes and sizes. There were round ones, curvy ones, and spiky ones. There were long, thin ones, twizzly, spirally ones, and even squishy ones. Some had tiny holes, and others looked like exploding fireworks. Fergus and Callum had never seen such a beautiful sight, but they quickly realised that all of the little sea plants were in trouble. "What's wrong?" asked Fergus. One of the sea plants wandered over to Fergus and Callum. "Oh, it's terrible," it fretted. "A real crisis. We are all types of phytoplankton. We are like small factories that take carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and turn it into vital energy for lots of the creatures in the ocean. and even some on land as well. Eventually, all of the carbon that we take out of the atmosphere gets locked up in the mud and sand at the bottom of the ocean for years and years and years. "Wow!" exclaimed Fergus. "That does sound like a really important job." "Yes, it is," answered the phytoplankton. "It is important because if we left the carbon dioxide to build up in the atmosphere, the sea would get too warm and we wouldn't be able to live here anymore. But by locking it away in the seabed, we can keep our homes safe. But the problem is that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is building up too quickly, and we've almost run out of a key ingredient that we need to run our factories." "Oh dear, said Callum. "What is it that you need?" The phytoplankton blinked sadly, and, with a low, slow sigh, he muttered, "Iron. Here, in some parts of the open ocean, we just never seem to have enough." Well, Fergus could not believe it. After spending so long in his peatland home, trying to remember what it was that he needed to do, and then travelling far and wide all over the world, he had finally found his job. Puffing up his chest with pride, he announced, "I can help you. I'm an iron colloid. And not just me. All of my friends here can help you too." And so, with a little help from Callum and all of the other iron colloids from the estuaries and the sea ice and the deserts and the deep, deep sea, Fergus got stuck into the role that he was born to play. All day he worked hard turning carbon dioxide from the atmosphere into vital energy for lots of the creatures in the sea and some on land as well, then storing it safely away in the seabed. At the end of the day, when the sun had sunk well below the horizon and the first sleepy stars began to brighten up the night sky, Fergus looked back on his journey and thought to himself, "Wow, who would have thought that someone as small as me could ever have such a big job to do, so very far from home?" And, with a satisfied sigh, the tiny iron colloid drifted off to sleep, dreaming big and important dreams. The end.